Mary Ann Cotton was connected to the deaths of at least 20 people over the course of 20 years. Most of them were her own family. She didn't raise suspicion for a long time because she moved often, and because most of her victims died slowly, from what doctors believed to be common illnesses at the time. She worked as a nurse, took care of sick children, and kept a neat home. People saw her as a grieving mother and respectable widow. But behind closed doors, she was methodically killing the people closest to her, usually right after convincing them to buy a life insurance policy. Her story stayed mostly quiet until something she said one day raised suspicions. And that's when people finally started asking questions. Mary Ann Robson was born in a small village in County Durham in 1832. She was the daughter of a miner, Michael Robson, and his wife, Margaret. Her childhood was simple: small homes, dirt roads, and the constant rumble of coal work nearby. When Mary Ann was 8 years old, her father fell 150 feet down a mine shaft. He died instantly. If his sudden death wasn't devastating enough, the mining company he worked for brought his body back to the family home in a sack, stamped with the words, "Property of the South Hetton Coal Company." To make matters worse, the family's home belonged to the company too. Within weeks of his death, the family was forced to leave. Mary's mother, Margaret, had no income and no rights to stay. It was a brutal reality that shaped Mary Ann early on. Everything you had could be taken in an instant. A year later, her mother remarried. The new stepfather, George Stott, was also a miner, but he was stricter than Michael had been. Mary Ann didn't care for him, but she didn't complain either. She was described as quiet, tidy, and obedient. Even as a child, she knew how to present herself well. Clean clothes, soft-spoken words, never drawing the wrong kind of attention. At 16, she left home to work as a nurse in a nearby village. It was respectable work, caring for children, tending to the sick, and she stayed with the same family for a few years. When the children she looked after were sent away to school, she returned to her mother's home and trained as a dressmaker. But Mary Ann wasn't built for small, quiet life in a mining village. She wanted more security than her mother ever had. In 1852, at the age of 20, Mary Ann married a colliery laborer named William Mowbray. He was steady and hardworking, the kind of man who kept to himself and put in long hours. Not long after their wedding, the couple left County Durham and moved to the southwest of England, where William found work with a railway company. Over the next several years, Mary Ann gave birth to multiple children, most of them boys, along with a daughter named Margaret Jane. The family was living in the southwest of England at the time, and records from that period are sparse. What is clear is that nearly all of those children died young. Margaret Jane, the first daughter, was born around 1856. She died before the age of 3. After the family moved back to the Northeast, Mary Ann gave birth to another daughter, Isabella, in 1858. She would be the only one of her early children to survive. In 1861, another daughter was born, again named Margaret Jane. She lived until 1864 and died at around 3.5 years old. The next child, John Robert William, was born in 1863 and died in 1864, just shy of his first birthday. At the time, it wasn't unusual for children to die in infancy or early childhood. Illness spread quickly, especially in working-class homes with limited sanitation. Fevers, stomach bugs, and infections took lives often, and without much warning. People grieved and moved on. But in early 1865, Mary's husband William became seriously ill. He had stomach pain, vomiting, and a fever that escalated quickly. Within a matter of days, he was gone. The doctors listed the cause as an intestinal disorder. Mary Ann collected his life insurance, £35, or about $2,000 today. This was about half a year's salary for laborers like William at that time. She also received a smaller payout for their recently deceased son. It wasn't a fortune, but it gave her options. She was now a widow with one surviving child, Isabella, but she wouldn't be on her own for long. After William's death, Mary Ann stayed in Sunderland and took a job as a nurse at the local infirmary. People said she was quiet, neat, and good with patients. She dressed in black, kept to herself, and didn't speak much about the children or her husband. Most people saw her as a grieving widow trying to rebuild her life. It was at the hospital where she met George Ward, a former patient she had helped care for. He wasn't in good health, but he was kind, and he seemed to like the way Mary Ann looked after him. Within a few months, the two were living together. By August of 1865, they were married. George's condition got worse not long after the wedding. He became weak and feverish. He had stomach pain and trouble keeping food down. Mary Ann said she was doing everything she could to take care of him, spoon-feeding him, changing his linens, and calling the doctor when he got worse. George died in October of 1866. The doctor said it was likely a mix of cholera and lingering fever. No autopsy was performed. George had been sick before the marriage, so his death wasn't unexpected or suspicious. Once again, Mary Ann collected a small insurance payout, and once again, she moved on. After George Ward's death, Mary Ann moved in with a local man named James Robinson. He was a widower, a shipwright with a steady income, and he had children of his own. He had recently lost his wife and hired Mary Ann as a housekeeper to help manage the household. Within weeks, Mary Ann was doing more than just cleaning. She was helping raise the children and quickly developed a relationship with James. By the end of 1866, she was pregnant. Around that time, tragedy struck again. James's youngest daughter suddenly became sick. She complained of stomach pain and started vomiting. Her fever climbed quickly, and within a few days, she died. The doctor said it was likely some kind of gastric infection. James was heartbroken. First his wife, now his daughter, all in a short span of time. Mary Ann was there through it all. She helped with the funeral arrangements and tried to keep things running at home. But just as they were trying to move forward, Isabella, Mary Ann's only surviving child from her first marriage, began showing the same symptoms. She had been fine when they moved in, but now she couldn't keep food down. Mary Ann told James she was looking after her, but a few days later, Isabella was dead too. 2 children gone in rapid succession. James was grieving, but he also had to focus on the new baby Mary Ann was expecting. She told him they needed to stay strong and look ahead. They buried Isabella quietly, and life went on. Not long after Isabella's death, James and Mary Ann got married. To the outside world, it looked like James was moving forward. He had a new wife and a baby on the way. But things inside the house were starting to feel off. James noticed that money was missing. At first, it was small things, coins he thought he'd left on the mantel, a few banknotes from his drawer. Then he found out that Mary Ann had convinced one of his older children to pawn some of the family's belongings. She told the boy it was for food, but James hadn't been asked, and no food had appeared. He started to worry. He'd already lost 2 children, and now his savings was vanishing. Mary Ann kept brushing it off, saying she was just trying to help, but could never actually produce anything she claimed to use the money for. Then, a letter came in the mail. It was from the brother of one of Mary Ann's former husbands, someone James had never heard her talk about. The letter warned him to be careful. It said Mary Ann had a trail of dead husbands and dead children behind her, and that something wasn't right. James didn't know what to make of it, but he couldn't ignore his gut feelings anymore. He watched her more closely. He noticed she always insisted on handling the cooking. She never let anyone else serve the food. He started making excuses not to eat the meals she brought him. He also started asking quiet questions around town, about her past and the people she'd lived with before. And the more he heard, the less he trusted her. Eventually, he confronted her. He accused her of stealing, lying, and keeping secrets. She denied everything at first, then tried to turn it back on him, said she was being mistreated, and that she was doing her best to make their family work. But James had made up his mind. He told her to leave the house. Just weeks later, Mary Ann gave birth to a little girl. She named her Mary Isabella. She begged James to let her come back, to raise the baby together, to try again. But he refused. He told her she was no longer welcome in his house. He took his child and committed to raising her himself. And just like that, Marianne moved on again. By now, there was a pattern, even if no one had put all the pieces together yet. Marianne would marry or move in with a man, convince him or his children to take out a small insurance policy, and then, not long after, someone in the household would fall ill. The insurance payouts weren't large, usually just a few pounds, but they always came at exactly the right moment. She was almost always in debt. She owed back rent, borrowed money from neighbors, and had a habit of leaving towns with unpaid bills behind her. Sometimes, she moved the day after collecting a payout, slipping away before the landlord or grocer could catch her. She didn't live lavishly. The money was never enough to change her life. It just kept her going a little longer. After being kicked out by James Robinson, Marianne drifted for a while. She worked short nursing jobs and moved between towns, writing letters to acquaintances and former employers asking for help. She claimed to be a grieving widow, a struggling mother, or an ill woman in need, depending on who she was writing to. In early 1867, Marianne went to stay with her mother in Seaham Harbor. Her mother, Margaret, had taken ill and was growing weaker. Marianne arrived to help care for her. But within days, Margaret's condition worsened. She began experiencing stomach cramps, vomiting, and fatigue. Despite Marianne's care, she died suddenly. The official cause of death was listed as gastric fever, but some in the family found it odd that Margaret had begun to improve, until Marianne arrived. However, no one investigated the matter. By 1870, she had settled in County Durham. That's where she met Frederick Cotton, a recent widower with 2 young sons and a stable job as a colliery worker. He needed help caring for the boys, and Marianne offered to move in as a housekeeper. It wasn't long before the two started a relationship. She presented herself as someone who had also suffered losses. She told him she wanted a fresh start. Frederick believed her. They were married in September of that year. Shortly after the wedding, Frederick took out a life insurance policy. It wasn't large, but it would provide something for the children and for Marianne if something happened to him. She encouraged it. A few months later, Frederick Cotton began experiencing stomach pain and vomiting. At first, it seemed like a stomach bug, nothing serious. But his symptoms escalated quickly. He grew weak, couldn't keep food down, and began running a high fever. Marianne told neighbors he was under the weather and that she was nursing him back to health. Within days, he was dead. The official cause was listed as typhoid fever. Marianne collected the insurance payout, just under 40 pounds, and stayed in the house with Frederick's sons. She also brought in a boarder around that time, a man named Joseph Nattrass. He was a former lover from years back, someone she had reconnected with by letter. Nattrass moved into the home and took up a room with the widow and her stepsons. Marianne was now living in a house with 2 grieving boys and a man who was not their father. At first, things seemed stable. Frederick's sons, Charles Edward and Frederick Jr., stayed in the home, and Marianne carried on as if nothing had changed. She cooked, cleaned, and looked after the boys. To outsiders, it looked like she was doing her best under difficult circumstances. But those close to her started noticing small oddities. The boys didn't look well. They were often tired, quiet, and pale. Marianne said it was grief. They missed their father. The neighborhood doctor agreed. He saw no reason to suspect anything else. Then, in early 1872, little Frederick Jr., the younger of the 2 Cotton boys, became seriously ill. Vomiting, fever, stomach pain. Marianne said she was nursing him as best she could, but his condition declined rapidly. He died not long after. She collected another insurance payment, this one even smaller. But she didn't seem fazed. Instead, she focused her attention on Charles Edward Cotton, the only child left in the home. But something was brewing beneath the surface. Marianne had recently contacted the local parish to inquire about financial assistance. She was struggling, she said. a widow with a dependent boy and limited income. She asked if the parish could help place Charles in the workhouse, a sort of poorhouse for orphaned or unwanted children. The official she spoke to was skeptical. Why would she want to send away a child she'd raised? Marianne reportedly answered, "I won't be troubled long. He'll go like all the rest." The official didn't forget that. Not long after, Charles became ill. Vomiting, cramping, fever, same symptoms. But this time, the official had his suspicions. When Charles died, the authorities were notified. An investigation was launched. And for the first time, Marianne couldn't move away quietly. She was trapped in one town, in one house, with a string of dead family members behind her, and a parish official who remembered her chilling words. A post-mortem examination was ordered on Charles Edward Cotton. They were about to discover what had really been inside all those grieving homes. When the post-mortem results came back, the findings were undeniable. Charles's stomach showed clear signs of poisoning. The chemical tests revealed traces of arsenic, a slow, painful toxin that had been used in dozens of products at the time, from rat poison to dye. It was also the substance at the heart of a growing number of suspicious deaths across England. Authorities started connecting the dots. The suspicious symptoms, the string of dead children, the conveniently timed insurance payouts, and, most damning of all, Marianne's comment to the parish official. "He'll go like all the rest." They exhumed the body of young Frederick Jr. next. Same results: arsenic. They pulled death certificates, tracked down surviving family members, and interviewed former neighbors from Sunderland, South Hetton, and Durham. Everywhere Marianne had lived, death had followed. Joseph Nattrass, the boarder and former lover who had also died suddenly just months earlier, was exhumed too, and again, arsenic. The pattern was undeniable. Even more disturbing, investigators learned that Marianne had insisted on preparing all the food and drink for her victims, including tea, which she always served from the same black household teapot. In July 1872, Marianne Cotton was arrested for the murder of Charles Edward Cotton. The newspapers exploded with the story. They called her the Dark Angel, the Black Widow, and the most wicked woman in England. Her face was suddenly everywhere, stern, pale, tightly framed by her widow's bonnet. While in prison, Marianne gave birth to one final child, Edith Quick Manning Cotton, her daughter with Joseph Nattrass. The baby was taken from her and placed in foster care. Marianne would never see her again. The trial began in March 1873. Crowds filled the courtroom, eager to catch a glimpse of the woman who had allegedly poisoned her husbands, her children, and even her own mother. The prosecution laid out a clear pattern: deaths that followed insurance policies, similar symptoms, and one woman always at the center. Marianne insisted she was innocent. She blamed illness, bad luck, and poverty. She said the accusations were unfair, that she was being targeted because she was a poor woman who had lost too many loved ones. She even tried to argue that the arsenic found in the post-mortem could have come from dyes in the wallpaper or trace amounts in medicine. But the jury didn't buy it. On March 24, 1873, Marianne Cotton was found guilty of the murder of Charles Edward Cotton. She was sentenced to death. Her execution took place a few months later on March 24, 1873, at Durham Prison. A large crowd gathered outside the prison gates, while inside, Marianne was led to the gallows. The hangman botched the execution. The drop was too short, and Marianne didn't die instantly. Instead, she was slowly strangled to death in front of witnesses. A grim and ironic end for a woman who had caused so many slow deaths herself. Some believe that the execution may not have actually been botched, and that the rope was purposefully made too short, but those suspicions could not be confirmed. She was buried in an unmarked grave inside the prison yard. Looking back, it was clear that James Robinson, Marianne's third husband, had likely just barely escaped death. He had refused to take out a life insurance policy when she suggested it. He'd noticed money going missing, caught her in lies, and ultimately kicked her out. He even grew suspicious of how she always insisted on preparing meals and began refusing to eat the food she served. Unlike the others, he trusted his instincts, and it may have saved his life. In total, Mary Ann Cotton is believed to have killed as many as 21 people, including 4 husbands, a lover, her mother, and at least 11 of her 13 children. All of it hidden beneath lace collars, clean aprons, and polite conversation. All of it, one cup of tea at a time.